Hi, my name is Leah Day, and welcome to this video for the Building Blocks Quilt Along. Today we're learning our first design in our pinwheel block. This is zigzags and lines. It's something that we've done definitely before, but this block is a little tricky with how you move around it. So let me give you some tips on how to get started, knock out the ditching of this block with the least amount of travel stitching. Okay, so here's our quilting guide for this particular design, and if you're looking for this pattern where you can print this out and mark your block, you can find it in the Building Blocks quilt pattern available at leahday.com. Okay, so here's what I've done so far. I've stitched in the ditch over, I travel stitched along the edge, I just kind of knocked out that outline a little bit, went to the diagonal, stitched along the edge again, came across the middle, came up to the corner and hit another diagonal. So I ended up right here. And that's when I kind of took a moment and was like, all right, well, how can I flow through this with the least amount of travel stitching? And what was interesting is I found if you come from here and you go in, out, in, then you do your zigzags, you'll end up right here. Then you can go in, and zigzag out again. And you can repeat that through the whole block. So really, if you wanted to even lighten your load a little bit, you don't even have to ditch the block if you don't want to. You could start on the edge, stitching into the center, zigzag out, and then work that way instead. So there's definitely two ways of stitching this block. I already ditched mine, so it's already secured that way. Josh is more than likely going to decide not to stitch these lines, so that way you can see what both effects will look like. But I think it's going to look equally good whether you have these lines between those pieces stitched or not. So let's get on the machine and see how this works in free motion. Okay, so I ended up on this corner, so I'm going to stitch over to my straight lines. And I'm going to do that in, out, in. I'm going to stitch straight in. And here's a little warning, that area right in the center is quite dense. There's lots of lines of seam allowances coming together, so I'm just going to get close to it, but not really insist on stitching all the way into that area. And notice that I also slowed down quite a bit. I want to put the least amount of thread into that area as well. This time I have to stitch all the way in because I have to connect down here to start my zigzags. So that's what I'm going to do. I stitch all the way in. When I get about an inch away from it, that's when my hands start to slow down. That's when I really let off the pressure on my foot pedal. Slow down there too. Okay, and I'm working in a clockwise direction. That's the trick with this block. Now I'm going to start my zigs. Just working back and forth. It's funny, whenever I do these, I usually say zig, zag, zig, zag in my head. I know it's kind of silly, but that's what's going on in my brain at least. It makes me smile as I quilt it, which usually loosens me up a little bit, makes it a little easier to stitch through. As you get to these longer lines, you might find that you have to reposition your hands a little bit just to maintain some control. Especially since we're right here on this edge, I totally lost that line. I'm all off of it. That's going to get covered up by binding. I'm not too worried, but that was not on the line at all. So basically from here, it's just wash and repeat 4 times. I'm going to go on these straight lines, in, out, in, then hit this next set, let me get it on camera, and zig out. So I'm going to just kind of flow through this block and back up the camera so that way you can see how I work through the whole thing. It's really just knock out one set and then wash and repeat through the whole block. Okay, so I'm nearing this last zigzag area, and as I come in here, I want you to listen to my machine as I get into this area and just how dense it is and what that sounds like as the needle's piercing the fabric. What you want to do, you can hear that, what you want to do is really slow down your machine and only take like 2 or 3 stitches as you work into the area. You definitely don't want to get into the middle and just stay there going up and down. That's a good way to break thread or get a bird's nest on the back of your quilt. Same thing for stitching out and into your zigzags. You want to just get out of there. I just make, you hear it? It's really a loud, kind of almost a thunk sound, because it's going through probably 4 layers of fabric right there, even with trimming out, even with clipping that seam allowance in that area. It's going through a lot of layers, so just watch your needle, stitch out of the area and as fast as you can, and don't worry too much about big stitches. It's really not the end of the world. We've got more than enough security right here to flip it over. You can see all those lines are coming together. Even still, we ended up with quite a lot of density right there. It's not going to hurt your quilt at all, but it's something to definitely be mindful of as you stitch through it. So that's it for stitching zigzags and lines through our pinwheel block. You are going to have density right there in that center area. Best thing to do, get in there, get out of there. As you're stitching the straight lines in, try to avoid having to go all the way into the inside. Even if you are 1 or 2 stitches out of that center, that's reducing the bulk just a little bit, if that makes sense. If you break thread in that area, it's okay. It happens. It could be the size of your needle, it could be the thickness of your thread, it could be that all of the seam allowances come together. All of those things will affect your quilting, and it can break your thread, most certainly. It's one of those things where if you look at it and you decide, I don't want to ditch this, I want to reduce some of the threads going into this area, that's fine. Here's a picture of what the back of my quilt block ended up looking like. And here's a picture of what the back of Josh's quilt block ended up looking like. So you can see definitely 2 ways of stitching this block. Whether you ditch it or not, it's going to come out beautiful. So I really hope that you enjoy quilting along with us. My name is Leah Day, and this has been a video for the Building Blocks Quilt Along. Pick up your copy of the Building Blocks quilt pattern and learn how to piece and free motion quilt with us through 42 beautiful quilt blocks. Find your pattern at leahday.com. Until next time, let's go quilt.